Welcome to Life After 40 Conversations with Philip Blackett. This is a space for honest, thoughtful conversation about midlife without the hype, without diagnosis, and without pressure. If you're somewhere between 35 and 55 years old and quietly navigating questions about your energy, your identity, your work, your faith, your relationships, or your health, you're not alone. Midlife can often look stable on the outside and feel unsettled underneath. Life After 40 conversations exist to do one thing well: to give adults in midlife the language, the clarity, and the calm perspective for a season that can often feel confusing, lonely, or silently overwhelming. This show exists to help you feel seen, steady, and less alone as you navigate the second half of life. Now, bear in mind, this is not a self help program. It's not a medical show. It's not even a motivational pep rally. What this is a meaning making space where each episode is a grounded conversation with myself, alongside leaders, caregivers, entrepreneurs, pastors, parents, professionals, and thoughtful human beings who are living through midlife in real time, just like you and me. We reflect on lived experiences without issuing prescriptions with peer pressure, because I believe in this deeply. Midlife is worth living and worth living well. And living it well doesn't start with pressure, it starts with perspective. So if you ever thought to yourself, why does this season feel different? Or why am I rethinking things that used to feel settled before? You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And I'm grateful that you're here. So let's begin today's conversation. My guest today is Shaun C. Dawson. Shaun is a husband, father of two, and a tech leader who, like many dads, is figuring out what it really means to raise boys in today's world. He brings curiosity, honesty, and a willingness to learn alongside each other as we go forward here. He's on a mission to help parents raise boys into men of strength, men of character, and men of emotional resilience, because he believes that the future of our families and our communities depends on the kind of men we raise today. As the creator of the Raising Men podcast, his work began as his own search for guidance while raising his son in a world that often misdefines masculinity. And so, what started as a personal quest has become a platform where he sits down with leading voices in parenting, mental health, leadership, and boyhood development to uncover practical real world wisdom fathers, especially those over 40, can use right away. Shaun, welcome to Life After 40 Conversations.
Thank you, Philip. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the kind intro.
Absolutely, no problem. So, just to get started, I love to get your own words here. We just shared your introduction with our audience, and so we'll love to get your take on this first question. Before the titles, before the resume, even before the introduction, who is Shaun in this season of life?
Yeah, I feel like the way that I would characterize it is that kind of in my earlier stages of life, it was a sprint, right? I was constantly running, I was racing, I was trying to get ahead, I was trying to start businesses, I was trying to succeed, in corporate life and all of that, and um, and now it feels much more like a sustainable, maybe a marathon, right? And it's I wish I had that kind of perspective back, 20 years ago when I was encountering all of those things for the first time. Although I'm not sure that it would have been it would have been smart to do things back then the way that I do them now, right? I have a much different perspective and understanding and wisdom in a lot of ways. Um, and I've got I also have a a body that is a lot more difficult to keep shape, and a bunch of those other things. A lot less energy unless I'm really unless I husband it properly. And so there are opportunities and challenges at every stage, I'm taking it one day at a time, really.
Absolutely. And so when you think about like midlife, like I normally characterize midlife as a period between 35 and 55 years old. Um, when did you realize first that something had shifted within you?
Probably the change happens so gradually that you don't know it. I think there were there are probably two things that I could probably point to back when I went, yes, that was something I noticed. Things are really, really different. And the first was the birth of my son, who was my first child, and that is, I mean, I think that's a moment that everybody experiences as a sea change in their life. You really go from a place where your life, one way or another, was all about yourself for the most part, to a place where um, it's now not in a lot of really, really specific ways. And so that really hit me. And I don't think there's anything special. I think that probably hits everybody, regardless. The first time you have a child. Now, it so happens that I ended up not having children. My son was born when I was 45, and so I ended up doing that much, much later in life. But I think that transformation would have happened no matter when I did that. Um, but the other one is probably when I noticed that my body was just not the same. And it really came to a head, strangely enough, when I noticed that my eyesight was going. Um, I had always had really, really amazing eyesight. In my whole life, I had 20/10 vision in one eye, 20/15 in the other. I could see up close, far away, everything. My vision was unbelievable, and then it wasn't. All of a sudden, over the course of a year, it went. I'm a pilot, and so I have to do these flight physicals every 2 years, and literally from one flight physical to the next, 2 years later, um, my eyes were just way different. I couldn't read the bottom of the chart anymore. I started having to wear, and at the end of that flight physical, my flight surgeon said, "Yeah, I'm gonna have to put a restriction on your medical, saying that you have to have glasses in the cockpit." And I just went, "Oh my gosh, this that is the it. That is it, right?" I mean, that is and it just really struck me. And it feels like a silly kind of minor thing, but I think probably a lot of people end up experiencing something like that, where there was something you used to be able to do, and you used to be able to do it easily, flawlessly, without even thinking about it. And all of a sudden, oh, I can't do that anymore. And then that leads to a cascade of additional revelations that are pretty difficult to contend with.
Wow. There's so much to go on that one too, Sean, because I think on the first one, when you're talking about birth of your first child, you recognize what a lot of people tend to recognize. It's just like you reach a point where it's like, it's no longer about you. You know, there's
Yeah.
somebody else that's dependent on you, and that requires a shift in how you view things. Where it might have been just like, hey, it's just I'm making sure I take care of myself. I may have a spouse or a partner, but it very much is like, we're both adults though, at least, as opposed to someone that's like, okay, you have somebody that literally can't do just about anything
Yeah.
without your help,
You will die.
and you have to be that person, and you're like, that's a completely different shift from what you had before,
Yeah.
and I definitely think that that's a huge, culture shock for people. I know it was when I had my twin daughters where it's just like, You recognize things change just in an instant. Once they're out, once they're breathing, everything changes.
Mhm.
Um, but then also, as you mentioned before, Sean, like, really recognizing like your body, like that to me is one that's always interesting, where it's like, whether it's like we used to have this sense that we feel like invincible when we were younger and like nothing could stop us,
That's right.
or it's just like I think for me, like I can relate to you a little bit. Like I always had like people would say like perfect vision, but I had a moment where what I could see far away started to get a little blurry for me. Like granted, it's still better than most, but when I noticed it was different for me, and I noticed it was blurry compared to me being able to see it straight ahead, like yards ahead, and notice like, okay, I think this is what aging is about. I think this is part of it. And how do you reconcile with that? How do you deal with that? How do you make peace about that? Even if it was like, hey, I could just try to do what I can to get my sight just the way it was before, or is there kind of a subtle resignation or just an acceptance that this is part of the journey? Like, how was that for you when you were going through that test and you find out where your vision is, and afterwards when you kind of come to yourself and you recognize like what were the thoughts going in your head? Like how did you move on that sort of realization? Like, hey, my body is getting older. My body is changing.
Yeah, I mean, what you described was exactly my experience, and I it took me a while to come to terms with it. I it was probably a couple months before I mean, I bought the glasses, because I had to in order to fly legally, and it's one of my passions. I had to buy glasses, but I didn't have to use them. I just had to have them. And finally, I tried them on. Like I was really struggling to read something on my phone early in the morning. Early in the morning, it's the worst. And I got my glasses and I put them on, and it was it was sort of this physical embodiment of this mental struggle that I went through in order to come to terms with this stupid fact. And I mean, if I hadn't attached so much significance to and so much pride um, with my eyesight, it wouldn't have mattered as much. But I that's that's the part of it. It's like it wounds your ego, and I think the I think that the one thing, the key to making not so much peace with it. It's not even that. It's about being able to thrive in this season. I think the one key is to let go of your ego. And that, like, death comes for us all. And that is, as is everything, there's a tension there between there, it's a problem. Death will be coming for you because you're one of us all. But it's also an opportunity. It gives you the opportunity to recognize, oh, there is an end of the line. And you need to make sure that you have the impact that you want to have on the world. And that means defining what that impact is going to be and recognizing that it needs to be something you find is good and aligns with your values. I mean, that means you have to have values. And that means you've got to, kind of enumerate them and figure out what they are and think about that. And that's all part of what it takes to be a mature adult that, you know, you might not that you don't have to go through that, right? And um, but you're gonna have a much better time if you do.
It's true. I think one of the things that comes off, Sean, And the reason why I'm digging a little deeper here is just kinda understanding, like, you know, this is something that, like you said, like, father time is undefeated, we often say. It comes for us all, as you said, specifically, and that applies for both men and women after a certain age.
100%. Yeah, I
And
think it's worse for women.
and I think even more so, even, like, looking at it for men like us, the ego part plays a big role here too, because maybe we had a certain image of what we would be like.
Mhm.
And like you said, you got the glasses. Now it's a question of whether or not you wear them. Do you wear them primarily for flying? Do you wear them out in public when you're not flying? Did the thought ever come to your mind as like, hey, like I'm gonna go hang out with my buddies and just to make sure I can see everything right, I'm gonna wear my glasses.
You know what? That's funny you mentioned that because I don't do that. I don't bring my glasses with me into a restaurant. And I know that I'm going to struggle to read the check. I know that I'm going to struggle to read the menu. And yet I still don't bring my glasses with me into the restaurant. I forget it is not so much denial as it is forgetting it, but I still don't do that.
It's that's what I was just thinking. It's just like, and the reason why I'm saying that is for people listening or watching. Oftentimes, and it impacts you and it impacts me too, is just like how we look at things, like, I would look at glasses for me per se as more like a fashion statement because it looks good, not
Sure.
necessarily because I needed them.
Yeah.
But there's no telling if there may be a place where I may have to have glasses. And so how do you grapple with that? Like you said, whether it's ego or expectations or just your image of yourself and what you feel like is your identity as you get older, how do you deal with it when something like that changes and it's something as crucial as your passion for flying? If you want to engage in that, you have to make a subtle change. How do you wrestle with that? How
Mhm.
do you do that? Because some people that may say, "Hey, look, that's just too much. I rather just not. I rather just like, hey, put flying to the side and just do something different."
Yeah,
Uh,
and they're actually there is a time in every pilot's life where they get too old to fly. And there's a lot of ways that that happens. One of the most common ways is that you don't pass a medical, and so like I said, there's a medical that you take, and if you're on certain medications or if you have certain ailments, you just aren't allowed to fly. They're worried that you're going to die in the cockpit and you're going to crash into a building and kill a bunch of people, and they won't let that happen. And so it's a privilege to be able to do it. And once you get past a certain age, you won't be able to do it anymore. And um, and the other thing that can happen is that insurance just won't cover you, and so you won't be able to get insurance. And I have friends who are dealing with this. You know, they're in their 60s and they fly big expensive airplanes that have the capacity to do a lot of damage if they were to hit the wrong thing, and you know, they struggle to get coverage, and that's the insurance company telling you, "No, we're not willing to take the risk." And the insurance company knows the risk. You don't, and they're objective about it. They're putting their money on the line, and so um, we all know that that is something that we're going to deal with, and but it always feels so far away. You see it happen to your friends, and you kind of you see that happening, but it feels really far away. But time accelerates as we get older. You know, it's like when I was young, 5 minutes seemed like an eternity, and now it feels like a blink of an eye. And you know, so 10 years is like that too. And so you know, you just gotta you can make that be an unhappy thing for you, or you can embrace it and and live in it, right? And make it be a happy thing for you. And I think that's the challenge. The challenge is you used to value these other things and now you value these things. And you get to pick what you value. It's like you're rowing across a stream, right? And you can pick a destination that's upstream, or you can pick a destination that's downstream. And nature wants you to pick the one that's downstream. And so maybe you should do that. And that's not always the case. Sometimes the one that's upstream, you need to strive and you need to work hard and you need to make sure that you get to the destination that's upstream. But in a lot of cases, if you really inspect why you care about that upstream destination, you'll find that it has to do with things that you really don't truly value. It has to do with your ego. It has to do with your your vision of yourself that might have changed. It has to do with a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter anymore.
Mhm. No, absolutely. What would you say, Sean, surprised you the most about midlife for you?
I think probably the thing that surprised me the most is how much I care about things that I didn't used to care about, and how little I care about things that I used to care a lot about. It goes back to that ego thing. It I still, I still have the ego. I still care about that, but it's just so much less substantial. Um, I I now get a great deal of pride in the way my son experiences the world. And sometimes it's in an unhealthy way. I I care a lot. My ego ends up getting wrapped up in how he does at basketball. And that's and I start getting frustrated that he's laying on the ground or not listening to his coach or not doing a good job in his basketball practice. And I have to separate out, why do I care this much about this? And I care because I want him to succeed. I want him to be great at basketball. Why? Because it reflects well on me. But also, I wish that I had gotten into sports at a younger age. Sports was something that I got tremendous value out of, but it didn't catch on with me. I didn't catch the sports bug until much, much later in life. And I wished that I'd done that earlier. And so I want him to catch the bug earlier. And so that is about him. But the other thing is about me. And I need to tease those things apart. And I need to, suppress or, eliminate or investigate the ego bit and try to not do that. But there is a kernel of truth there. There is a kernel of something that is in alignment with my values. And I need to cultivate that one.
It's interesting you say that because it almost makes me think like you're revisiting your childhood from the outside and you see somebody that came from you. So it's almost like a mini version of yourself to some degree going through childhood in a way. You're almost like, what would I have done differently now that I know what I know? And this kid that came from me doesn't know.
Yeah.
And what can we do to kind of help bridge the gap or make it easier or help out, just but then again, like you said before, how do you find the right balance between allowing your son to experience life in its fullness and spontaneity and being able to step in when you can to kind of help say, hey, this is probably better to go downstream or this is worth you going upstream here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it goes back to the ego thing. If you have to make that decision in real time. Am I doing this for myself or am I doing this for the boy? And if you're going to ask that, if you interrogate yourself really and deeply about why do I care this much about this thing? Um, then And the answer is, "No, no, no, it really is about his experience, and it really is about him." Okay, fine, do that. But if it's really about you, then I don't know, man. That is not, at least for myself, that is not a value that I think is worth pursuing. And, again, we all have to figure out which values we find valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what do you feel like, Sean? What did midlife force you to stop ignoring? And maybe you kind of talked about this earlier. And if so, feel free to dive deeper on this. But what did you feel midlife forced you to stop ignoring? And what changed once you paid more attention to it?
Yeah, and this is so much my experience in midlife because I ended up having kids at 45. It's all mingled together, right? And so I wonder to what extent other people have similar experiences to mine, but they have them earlier because it's about having kids versus having them when I had them, which is because it's about midlife. And so I have trouble teasing those things apart. But the thing that comes to mind when when I think about that is, I looked at I had a son, and then about 3 years later, we had a daughter. And I watched my son go into, start to graduate into our culture, right? He goes to pre-K, and then he goes to kindergarten and stuff like that. And it felt like he was swimming upstream. It felt like they were trying to eliminate everything that made him a boy. He's so high energy, and he's big, and he's strong, and he's very physical, and he likes to wrestle, and he likes to run around, and he likes to make noise, and he's such a boy. And I look at him versus I look at my daughter. I look at my daughter, I'm just not worried that the culture is going to recognize her with open arms. But I do worry about that with my boy. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And part of it is that there's what I consider to be a masculinity crisis in our culture today. And it's driven by this kind of polarity that we have where there's one side that thinks that all masculinity is bad and we should just suppress it. And, the time of men is over, whatever it is however that they would paint it. And then there's kind of an extreme opposite side that's reactionary to that, which is no, all the stuff that you say is bad is actually a virtue, and we're going to embrace it. And being a man is about being an asshole, and we're just going to do that. And neither of those two things is a healthy vision of masculinity. And what I fear is that if we don't cultivate a healthy vision of masculinity, then our boys will continue to suffer, and our boys are suffering. They are, I mean, is if 4 out of 5 suicides are male. I mean, if that statistic doesn't open your eyes to the fact that things are not right with our boys. Boys suffer from at vastly increased numbers to things like depression and things like addiction to gambling and drugs and pornography. And that's not to say that women and girls don't have their own struggles. They absolutely do. And we should focus on them, but it's not an either or thing. It's a yes and thing. And so when I looked at, the trajectory my boy's going to have and how what he's going to need in order to be able to thrive in the culture, it's not going to happen by default. I need to start being really, really intentional to make that happen. And that's why I started the podcast, is because I wanted to wrestle with that stuff. And I wanted to be able to have access to people that, could help me do that. And I wanted to have an open dialogue about it. One of the other things that motivated me is, my wife has 10 people that she shares every detail of her life with. And a number of years ago, my closest friend from high school came to me and said that he was getting a divorce. And I had the predictable reaction. Let's fix this thing and what's going on, all this stuff. And he started describing to me why he felt like that was the last resort and all of that. And basically was describing what his most recent year of marriage was like. And essentially, this had been going on for 10 years. The most recent decade of their marriage was really awful for him. And this was the first time hearing about it. In 10 years, one of my closest friends from high school had been really struggling, and I didn't hear one peep. And at first, I was pretty indignant. I was like, what kind of friend are you to not share this shit with me? And then I realized I have my own stuff. I don't share with him. What kind of friend am I? That I'm not allowing him to show up that way for me. And like, wait a minute, what's wrong with male relationships that we don't feel comfortable sharing our vulnerability like that, sharing these sorts of things? He's in therapy, he's doing all that, but I mean, that's not the same thing. Like, and so this combination of, man, men don't talk about stuff, combined with, wow, men are in crisis, combined with what's going to happen to our boys because what worked for me isn't going to work for him. What do we do about that? And that's why I wanted to start wrestling with that with the podcast. And so that's what I did.
I appreciate it. It's tough. I think that even though you kind of share 2 or 3 different things that happened, I think just like you said it towards the end, they're all related
Yeah.
because I think on one end, I tend to believe that, as a father, for one father speaking to another father, that, my family is my first ministry.
Mhm.
How I raise my kids, they're going to get this sense of what a man is like from their father.
That's right.
I have 2 daughters, so their relationship with a man in the future is gonna be based off of their relationship with their father,
Yeah.
and that puts a huge onus on me in midlife to get clarity on who I am at this point, right? And am I comfortable with who I am at this point that I feel comfortable being me, not just publicly out in the open, but even more so privately in my own home, where people really get to know the real me, which would be my wife and my kids.
Mhm.
And they see that on a day to day basis. You can't hide from the people that you stay and you reside and you do life with on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And even to that same point, too, I also find myself asking that same question as far as who am I in relationship to other people outside of the home, which can be friends, as you mentioned before. And am I a person that is someone that tries to be approachable and open for people that they would feel comfortable sharing
Yeah.
about what's going on in their lives, even if it's something that is as involved or as deep or as even dark as someone contemplating divorce? Um, and do I have that same sort of feel as well? Because it's kind of a give or take sort of thing, right? It's just like I want to hear from people and they probably want to hear back in return. Am I comfortable sharing the not so good things, even if it comes across as something that my ego may not like?
Right. It's in a lot of ways our the culture at the moment um really rewards what I would call performative strength.
Mhm.
And that is this image of being strong or this image of being tough or this image of being brave or those sorts of things. But strength and toughness and grit and bravery is not performative. It's what happens when you're not on the stage. and private. And so often, I think that we're getting away from a place where actual strength is rewarded. It's the image of strength that's getting rewarded. And that won't last forever. Because I think it's becoming pretty clear that that is not sustainable, and that performative strength isn't strength after all. That's a lesson that I think we're learning. And so the pendulum will swing back the other way. But it's so interesting because once you have kids like you have, like I have, um, you come to this realization, or at least a lot of people did. I did. You seem to have, that you need to. It's really important to be a good man. And in your case, you want to be a good man so that your daughters have a model of a good man that they can compare their future mates to potentially, right? And it's the same for me. I have a son and a daughter. So I need to do that for my daughter. But for my son, I need to be a good man so that he has a model of what a good man looks like,
Mhm.
so that he can be one. And if there's one thing that I've learned in the months that I've been doing this podcast, it's that modeling the thing is 80% of cultivating the thing. Meaning that my son literally doesn't hear anything I say, but he sees everything I do. And he will take the lesson that I'm teaching him if I do it. If I do the thing, he will do it too. And that goes both ways. It goes for the good and it goes for the bad. And so it's vitally important that you figure out, if you want your son to be a good man and you want your daughter to seek out a good man, then you need to be one yourself. And then now you have to start thinking, oh, what's a good man then? And as you go down that rabbit hole, it's interesting what you find. And it is a never ending journey.
And not to mention too, Sean, in our society today, I would venture to say that no one would likely find a definition of what a good man is that everyone would agree with nowadays. So, to that same point, I would say when you look at, and I have to do the same thing too. You know,
Yeah.
who am I going to be? What do I stand for? What are my values? What does being a good man seem like to me? Also, I think part of what goes on there too is recognizing that, hey, whatever I decide this is going to be, this has to feel right for me. And this has to be right for my family.
Yeah.
Most importantly, because I already know outside of the house, everyone can have one way or another different opinion, whether they're in agreement or they're not. And there's no way of getting around it, because I remember someone famously said one time, to avoid criticism, say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. But you can't be a good father or a good spouse or a husband and say nothing, be nothing, and do nothing. You have to do something, which means at some point in time, whether in the house or outside the house, you have to be open to the possibility and the likelihood of criticism. And how you are comfortable with that sort of judgment to then still be like, you know what? People may disagree. Society may have a different opinion. Culture may have a different way of looking at this. Masculinity in general nowadays, which might have been different from before. But for you, Sean, it's like, this is what we stand for.
Yeah.
And it's not so much saying values, which, kind of gets me on a tangent, but it's sort of related, where people kind of come up with, and organizations come up with values that we're striving for, values that on paper most people would agree with. It's almost like a Miss America type of No one can disagree with this. Like everyone will kumbaya on this one.
Yeah, it's performative.
But I tend to lean more towards or have more respect for those that have those values. Say, hey, listen, this is what we agree on as a family. This is what we stand for. And we fully acknowledge it's probably going to turn some people off.
Yeah.
Probably going to have some people feel some type of way. And I respect their opinion and their right to feel what they want to feel. But that's not going to change how I feel about what it is to be a man in my house and in this time and how I go about sharing and teaching that to my kids. Because hopefully they're going to look at you, Shaun, as the model before anybody else outside of the house as they get older. And that's the intention, at least how I look at it. I want to be that right example as a father and as a husband that regardless of what culture decides is in today and not tomorrow and cool today and, you know, cringy tomorrow,
Yeah.
I want them to at least say, you know what? Philip was consistent though. I may not agree with everything, but he was consistent and I respect that.
Yeah. I wish we talked about it a lot more. Like one of the things that I do on my podcast is I ask each guest and I spring it on them. I don't warn them that I'm going to do this. So I mean, if you end up on my guest on my podcast, you're gonna end up experiencing this, which is that the final question I ask everybody is the same question, which is, um, uh, give me one principle that comes to mind when I ask you what people should think about when they want to raise excellent men. And so over time, I've accumulated these list of principles, and but I kind of wish that we all, almost had to put our principles down on paper and show people what they were, because that would do two things. The first thing it would do is it would force me to go public on what my principles are. And now I either have to live up to those principles or be a public failure at living up to those principles. And I think that would make me a better person if I did that. The second one is I could go, man, that Philip Blackett, I'm impressed with that guy. I wonder what his principles are. And I could go to his list. Oh yeah, no, that's a good one. I'll take that one too. And I can. It's almost having it's your DNA for your behavior and for how you're going to comport yourself in the world. And I want to borrow from that. And these are your best practices. I'm going to take that. And and then I can incorporate whatever of your principles that I admire, that I think are good. I can incorporate them in my own life. And that would be a pretty awesome thing to be able to do. And yet we don't do that. We don't talk about, there probably is. When I say, what comes to mind when you think about masculinity? What is masculinity to you? You're going to have a different answer than me. And that's necessary and appropriate. And maybe they're gonna overlap, maybe they're not. But then we start talking about how there's a masculinity crisis and all those things, and these terms are vague and undefined, and it's difficult to come to a meeting of the minds on it. And so I wonder, I don't know, maybe that's something that we should build is a social media platform or something like that, where it's you got to put your principles out there and see what happens.
I like it. Partly because I remember doing an exercise like that. Like when I went through like my own midlife crisis when I turned 40, one of the things I did coming out of it was I went off of social media for about 6 months
Mm.
because I didn't want any more feedback from the outside as far as outside of my home on what's important, what's trending, what's important for me to realize or modify or replicate
Yeah.
or resemble for me and focus more time within. And then afterwards, I actually did do something similar where I had like 5 principles I put up on social media. Um, and I thought for me to that same degree, Sean, like I got a whole lot of clarity and conviction what I felt was most important. courage to actually put it out there. Because what led to it afterwards was people can oftentimes be very gratuitous, we'll say, on sharing their feedback in the comments on whether or not they resonated with it or not, or they think it
Yeah.
makes sense or not. And the thought I kept having when I looked at those comments, for example, Sean, was would you share with me your 5 values in response? Why not?
Yeah, here you are commenting on mine. You're crapping all over mine. What are yours?
And I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that so much just like so I can do the same thing because I
Sure.
wouldn't, but
Sure.
I think to your point, Sean, I think there's some merit in what you're saying because a lot of people wanna stay in the middle, and it's easy to criticize behind closed doors or behind a keyboard. And it's so much more different to say, if you only could choose 5 things that mean the most to you, what would that be? And being able to be present with what that is publicly, whether people agree with you or not. Because I think even more so, whether it's as fathers or just people in midlife in general, at some point we all have to come to grips with who are we in this day and age? And what would be our vision of ourselves? What is our mission in this chapter of our life? And also, what comes with that is what are our core values? And if you can only pick 5, for example, you can't pick everything. So
Yeah.
you're sort of letting people know what's most important to you and also letting people know what isn't as important to you.
Yeah.
So it almost makes me think in terms of like for me, Sean, I really appreciate you taking that time to figure out what is important to you. Cause I would imagine if you didn't take that time to focus on who you're going to be, what is important to you, what are the values you want to basically teach your children, both your son and your daughter, what do you think it would have cost you to keep going the same route a lot of people do and just not defining that for yourself at all?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think that I probably, yeah, I pride myself on being pretty intelligent. I've always been, you know, for a long time when I was younger, I was the smartest person in the room, in every room I was in. Then I realized, wait a minute, I need to get in smarter rooms. And and as you get older, your mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. You can start to see that happening, and it starts to happen around 40. And it's like, wow, yeah. And that's another one of those things. It's like the eyesight. Well, I used to be able to do that math in my head, and now I can't. I used to be able to remember people's names a lot more easily than I do. And how did I know this I've known this person for 10 years and I'm not able to come up with their name. And that's something I struggle with. And um, I think that you need to recognize that, and you need to kind of allow you need to again have the humility to understand that that's part of the whole deal, and you need to replace that. It used to be you could just be really smart and think things through right in the moment, and you need to replace that ability, which you no longer have, with a mechanism that eliminates the need for that. And I think that so you asked about what the cost would be, and I think the cost would be that it would be easy to become an old man yelling at clouds or screaming, "Get off my lawn," to the youngsters that are in the neighborhood and all that stuff. And I think that's how that happens. I think it happens because your sense of frustration mounts at all of the tiny indignities. And for us, okay, fine, my eyesight's going a little bit. Man, my back hurts when I wake up in the morning, and it takes me a little bit more coffee to get a little bit more energy. But then when we're 70 and 80, it those things are the vast majority of your life. And if you have not figured out a way to keep that from letting you build resentment at the world, it'll eat you alive and you'll be a miserable old man. And we see miserable old men all the time. But I think, when I look at old men that I admire, they they brighten up the room, right? People feel calm and safe and secure when they're around them. They're real men, right? And so I mean, I think it's healthy to aspire to be that and to look for those models. Just just as our kids look to us for the models of what they look for masculinity, we can look to people as well.
Absolutely. And so, like, as a model for yourself and your family and for those you're around, what would you say are some of the values, some of the beliefs or habits that have become non-negotiable for you at this point?
Yeah, I have not done the exercise where I was able to distill them down to 5 of the most important, right? But I'm very focused these days on trying to get my mind around what a healthy vision of masculinity is. And I have a list of the principles that people have given me on the podcast, and they're on the website raising.men. And those are all great. And some of them are really great, and some of them are, throwaways. That's okay. And but some of the ones that come to mind there are that excellence is failure. And that's probably, I think maybe that might be the most important one for me because I really value excellence, but I also value perfection, right? The performance, actually thinking about it that way is perfection is performative excellence in the
Mhm.
same way as puffing out your chest is performative strength. And which is to say that it's not the thing at all. It is a pretense at the thing. And so as excellence, in fact, is failure, but the failure gets less and less and less and less over time. So if you're an amazing archer, when you first start shooting arrows at targets, you're going to be lucky to even hit the target. And then pretty soon you're going to be lucky to just get in the circle. And then pretty soon you're going to be hitting the bullseye 9 out of 10 times. And but you're still not going to hit the bullseye 10 out of 10 times. And you're still excellent. I mean, if you look at the people in the Olympics, they're, you know, the difference between gold medal and silver medal is 0.001 seconds, some crazy thing. And it would be a tie if we didn't have clocks that could measure that fine of a grain. And yet, like, that's the thing. And you have to, in order to achieve that level, and you watch when they talk about, oh, you got the silver medal, and some jerk news announcer, oh, you got the silver medal. What's it feel like to be second place instead of first place? And the person's like, are you kidding me? Like, the very fact that I'm even on that podium, the fact that I'm in this room, let alone the fact that I made it to the podium, it's unbelievable. The fact is that that person happened to have a better slalom than me this day, at this moment, in this situation. It's, I mean, excellence is just failing less and less and less over time. So that's one of them. I'm also concentrating on what a definition of healthy masculinity would be. And that's really important to me. And I think that, again, it's like you said, no one's going to agree on everything, but I mean, it has to do with choosing protection over persecution. Like, you protect the weak. You think things through, you hold the line. If the crowd is moving one direction, but you know that that's off a cliff, you speak up and you hold the line. You know, men are the ones who forge the path through the forest, and then the rest of the community is the one that follows behind on the well-beaten path. You know, you acknowledge your mistakes, you're humble, you contribute to the culture in ways that make it better, not worse. People should feel safe around you. People should thrive in your leadership. I use this metaphor of, masculinity is like a castle. And when you think about a castle, one of the things that first comes to mind is the walls. The walls are very thick and they're very strong and they're impregnable. And when the advancing army comes to the castle, they have to lay siege. You can't take the castle because it's so fortified and so powerful. And so we think, oh, masculinity is all about strength and power. And that's part of it. It is important to be able to repel an invading army to the extent that that's a problem that can actually occur. Um, but it's vastly more important to make sure that the community within your castle walls, the community that is under your protection, can thrive. And if all you're focused on is the thickness of the walls and the height of the walls, the impenetrable of the impenetrability of the castle, then you're going to build a castle that has zero courtyard at all. It's just all walls, and that castle is more useless than a castle that has an enormous courtyard where the community inside is thriving. Because the point of the castle is to enable your community to thrive. And if you lose sight of that, if you start focusing on the performative aspects, the strength of the castle walls, then you're losing the entire theme of the whole thing. Does that make sense?
It does. I appreciate that. Just had a few last questions here as we finish up our conversation, Sean. This has been great. I know you had mentioned this word earlier in the conversation, so I want to bring it back to full circle here. Um, what does thriving look like for you now?
Man, that is an amazing question. I love that question. For me, um, if you look at downstairs, we have a set of principles that we have for our family, and it starts with the twin concepts of excellence and joy. So we strive for excellence, which again is failure, and we have fun doing it. We are happy. We are excited. We try to embrace our lives. So that would be what thriving means for me. Thriving to me is the experience of being excellent and being joyful.
I like it. 'Cause it's not so much just success, it's just how you feel while obtaining it. The achievement and the
Yeah, that's
fulfillment.
right. And I mean, that's going to be different for everybody. That's certainly different for me than it is for other people. And having financial security is definitely part of it for me. And so I spend a lot of mental energy and a lot of time and physical energy on making sure that that's true for myself and my family. Um, um, but that's not the goal in and of itself. That's part of the way of achieving the goal. And if you just focus on the financial security aspect of things, but lose the reason you want that, well, then it's worse than not having it.
Right. No, it makes perfect sense. Sean, this has been great. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure like our listeners and viewers are feeling the same way. And so as we start to close here, I do want to get your thoughts here that if there is someone that is watching or listening and that person feels like he or she is quietly drifting, trying to figure out who they are at this stage of life. Maybe it might be someone that's trying to grapple their own sense of what masculinity is for them, or just flat out just burning out in midlife. What do you want them to hear from you right now?
You know, I would offer 2 things, and the first is, um, you're doing a great freaking job. You're a great dad, you're a great parent, you're a great man or woman, or you're doing a great job, and give yourself the grace to recognize that you're doing a great job, and so don't be so hard on yourself. That's the first thing, that I would say. And the second thing is something that's true for me. It's really true for me, which is that we were not meant to white knuckle it. If you need to lose weight, you are not meant to just, it's not about willpower. It's not about just, oh, then, I just have to avoid, I have to like keep from eating the donuts in front of me. Like maybe that's part of it, but it's much easier to just not have donuts in front of you, right? Just avoid donuts so that you don't have to exercise that willpower. We have a very, very limited ability to exercise willpower. It is a muscle and it weakens fast. And so, and that's what I mean by white knuckling it. We're not, we can do it in short spurts. It's like sprinting, but you're going to need to get to a more sustainable space, a more sustainable pace in some other way. And so that means, and I mentioned it earlier, you need to have mechanisms. You need to have mechanisms that allow you to accomplish the thing. And so that means, it's like the principle thing that we talked about. Okay, you decided one of your mechanisms was going to be you're going to put your 5 principles out on social media and you're going to be public about that. And part of the reason you did that was because you knew that if you were public about it, you were vastly more likely to actually live up to it. That's how you kept from white knuckling it. You invited the world to hold you accountable to the thing that you wanted to have happen. That's a mechanism. So anything that matters to you, anything that you decide is important to you, create some kind of mechanism. And there's lots of them out there. There's one of them that I favor is from a book by a guy named Lanny Basham, who wrote a sports psychology book, which is the best sports psychology book I ever read, and I'm really well read on that subject. And but he came up with something called a directive affirmation, and the entire book is worth reading for that one tool. It's a great mechanism to keep yourself present and focused on a particular set of activities and goals. But so yeah, those are the 2 things that I think I would offer.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Sean. And so, for people that are listening that resonate with what you've been sharing with us thus far in this conversation and want to follow you and your work and what you're doing and even your principles for that matter, where's the best place for them to connect with you after this?
The website is raising.men. We're on all the socials at raisingmen_podcast. We have a YouTube channel, a podcast on all of the, on all the podcasty places, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere. And you can DM me on any of those platforms and definitely reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. Well, Sean, I really appreciate your honesty, your openness, and vulnerability as part of our conversation we shared here. I know it's been helpful for a lot of people listening and watching here. And so, for everyone listening and watching as we close, let this be a reminder that midlife isn't a problem to fix, it's an opportunity for you to figure out what matters most to you. Like, what are your values? What matters most to you here? And not just for yourself, but for the people around you, whether it's children, spouse, friends, your community, helping them flourish. And so if there's something today that really resonated with you with what Sean said and shared with you, meditate on it, sit with it, think of it over and see if there's something that he said that clarifies with what you're working through or maybe invited you to pay more attention to. You don't have to rush into action because that's where real change begins, not with urgency to act now, but with awareness with something new that you didn't experience before. In this case, something Sean shared here. And so, as we close here, to learn more about Life After 40, you can head on over to our website at lifeafter40.com. You're also welcome to connect with me at philipblackett.com. And just as a friendly reminder, as we conclude, midlife is worth living and worth living well. Thank you so much, Sean, for being a part of our conversation today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening and spending time with us here. And feel free to share this episode with someone that could be helpful for. This has been Life After 40 Conversations with Philip Blackett. Thanks so much for watching and for listening, and we'll see you in the next conversation. Take care.